Okay, welcome people. As always, I'll just wait until there's some participation. Once again, doing my dishes. So if you're new to my live stream, the way I work this is, I think you could watch this in replay or something, so I'll talk anyway. The way you can work this is leave a comment if you want to comment on one of my videos, if you want to ask me a question, if you want to bring up a subject for discussion, anything. The whole point of this is interaction with subscribers. The Dragonfly, welcome. Welcome. How are you today? You're the first person to come in, so welcome. It's always good to see because with these live streams, it always depends on participation. I am multitasking as I'm doing this, as you can see. So the Dragonfly will just wait for a few more people, or if you want to bring up something, that's okay. If you want to ask me a question, any feedback about videos, anything like that, that's how I try to do these live streams. It's all about participation, interaction with my subscribers. Paul Wally, welcome. I've just had a really weird and somewhat disturbing situation. Sorry to hear that, Paul. I've had a few myself. Not too bad, thanks. You're from Northern Ireland originally, like me. I think you live in England now. Yes, that's right. I was born in Belfast, but I have lived in England for most of my life, 24 years now, out of my 38 years. So I came over here in 2000 at age 14. I'm sorry to hear that situation, Paul. Maybe if you're comfortable with it, you can tell us about it. Sometimes it's good to have second opinions or something like that. Someone has replied me on three different video comment sections. Rudy on three different comment sections. Yes, I'm 39. I still live here. Okay, guys, what I'll do, I always sort of balance out different conversations. Dragonfly, are you in Belfast or? And Ray, welcome. Hi, Nathan. Question: do you think Britain should have a prison system like Norway, and do you think it stops reoffending? Well, I've got strong views on that issue. I'll come back to your question, Ray, but first, just Paul's brought up something, and if you don't mind, we'll discuss that first. Just otherwise, it'll get a bit messy if we're talking about different subjects. So, Paul, is that the same? Is it are the comment sections on the same subject, or do you think this person's trolling you or cyber stalking or something? It's a bit strange to have. I mean, it's one thing, for example, as a creator, I sometimes get trolls, but they obviously know my channel. With just leaving comments, it's strange to get trolling in that situation. Let's see. I don't know how they managed to do this. It was sections, all dealing with the Chinese stories. It's like a Wu Mao has hacked me. Fortunately, that's possible. I've had experience of that, Paul, back in 2016. I was defending a Canadian reporter for asking questions to Wang Yi, the so-called wolf warrior foreign minister of China, in Canada, I might add. It was a press conference in Ottawa, and the 50 Cent Army, you'll know what I'm talking about, decided to target this reporter really badly. When I then defended her job as a reporter, they targeted me, was her boyfriend, etc., etc. Obnoxious people. Anyway, it was suspicious because the very next day my whole social media was down. I couldn't access Facebook. I couldn't access this channel. It's like someone had hacked it. So as a precaution, I had to go through each and every basically person that I thought might have done that. It was a long, strenuous process. So I'm sorry to hear you've had that experience. Maybe, I don't know, you may want to take some precautions in case they hack your account, like fully hack your account. It's like this person can see my computer and see what channels I'm. Well, I don't know if you heard, but apparently we've all been hacked. Chinese agents have got access to 40 million voters in this country, which is troubling to say the least. And, you know, I think like me, Paul, you have strong views on the, what's happened here? My goodness, talking about hacking, the screen just went black. Okay, I think that was just because I hadn't touched it. I trust you guys didn't see that. Just the whole screen went black. Just before I continue, I am having problems with this computer at the moment, which is why I haven't uploaded a video. I keep getting a message saying the screen is what's the message? The page is unresponsive. That really annoying message, and I don't understand it. I have no extra apps. I have no photographs. I've cleaned up space as best I can. It will probably sort itself out, but very frustrating. But Paul, if you can, I would try and take some precautions because these people are absolutely, they will do that. They will try and hack. Regarding that security breach, I think the points come, where I think what the rhetoric we have of Russia should be matched with that of China. I think that would warrant the Chinese ambassador being summoned. Yeah, I'm talking about the 40 million voters, apparently details being hacked. So I was going to say people like me and you who do have strong views on China or have a vested observational interest there, we could well be targets. It's a sinister thing when you consider it's happening in this country. I mean, it's one thing being in China and having to tread carefully. I've experienced that twice. North Antrim. I lived in Bushmills for 5 years, the Dragonfly. So I don't know if you're anywhere near Bushmills. I actually lived there for 5 years, so small world. Um, couldn't see your screen go black from here. Okay, it was just me then. JX, hi Nathan. I haven't got time to stay around, which is frustrating, but I hope everything's well with you, mate. Thank you, JX. No worries if you need to do something. That's totally cool. I'll do these live streams periodically. I'm okay. I've had a few stresses. This computer glitch is irritating me. Page unresponsive, it's slowing down the whole system. But the good news is live streams seem to be unaffected. So I wanted to do a live stream because it's been a few days now. I mean, in normal circumstances, I would have uploaded a video about the Moscow attack and how Putin tried to blame the Ukrainians, but it's in all likelihood ISIS. Anyway, Ray, to answer your question, no, I absolutely do not think we should have a Scandinavian justice system. In all honesty, I'm a conservative, not party conservative, but socially conservative on the issue of crime. The Nordic systems are, in my view, ridiculously lenient. And it's a little bit of a myth that they've got very low crime rates. Sweden's actually now got the second highest gun violence rate in Europe, believe it or not, after I believe either Albania or Lithuania, outside obviously a war zone like Ukraine. Um, for me, I mean, I think our system is in too many cases lenient enough. I certainly wouldn't want it to be even more lenient, aka the Nordic system. Also, they're smaller countries in population, so a model that might work for 5 million people wouldn't work for 60 million, 68 million, in fact. Although, as has been pointed out to me, there are, of course, different legal systems in Scotland versus England and Wales. It's funny you mention it actually, because last night I had a reply from the Scottish Sentencing Council. And just like their English and Welsh counterpart, I contacted them. In Scotland, they have a rule. I don't know if any of you guys are in Scotland, but any offender aged under 25, they basically treat as a young offender. So a 24-year-old adult man or woman, according to the Scottish Sentencing Council, doesn't have a fully developed brain, and they cite international research. But you can get married, you can smoke, you can drink, you can own a business, you can join the armed forces, but apparently you're not criminally responsible in Scotland. Now, they did say they give a very legalist response. It was very detailed, and they were pointing out that there are a range of options available for judges, including custodial sentences. But yeah, anyway, to cut a long story short, I'm pretty hardline on crime. I think if you hurt society, you pay a price. You have to pay a price. And yes, I support rehabilitation efforts, but it has to come after the consequence, i.e., judicial punishment. So that's how I feel about it. And just a personal disclaimer here, that view is shaped from some very unpleasant experiences I've had with crime. My family 20 years ago had to move house because of local jobs, basically. So I know what that's like to be frightened to leave your own home and so on. Anyway, that's my take. So thanks for the question, Ray. But no, I don't think we should replicate the Nordic justice system. And I think I would comfortably say the majority of Britons would not want to see that. Um, I mean, take Norway, for example. Anders Breivik, the terrorist who killed 77 people, got 21 years, which is the maximum sentence in Norway. Apparently, though, he could be denied parole. I hope he is, because he's remorseless. Um, yeah. In Sweden, there was, just to cite another case, there was an arson attack at a Gothenburg nightclub back in the 80s, I believe it was. A lot of young people died, and the arsonist got, I think the main one got 7 years for effectively mass murder because they were young at the time. To me, that does not sit well with me. I feel strongly justice has to reflect the gravity of the crime. That doesn't mean revenge; it just means proportional justice. Of course, I wouldn't. There's extremes when we look at justice systems around the world. I think the Nordic systems are far, far too lenient. But then you look at places like the Philippines and some countries in Latin America where prisons are like basically human battery farms. Yeah, I mean, it's not that I have much sympathy for drug cartel members, but it is what it is. Um, so probably we don't have the worst justice system in the world, but I do think the legal establishment is massively detached. That's my gut feeling. Let's see here. Couldn't see your screen. Okay, guys. So maybe a few seconds if you're posting comments. Just bear with me. And also, I'm multitasking, so please excuse my hands here. I'm sort of corresponding to you guys. Anything, do Chinese people look down on black people? Well, Ray, what's your thoughts? Would you like to see the Nordic justice system? I wouldn't, but I mean, I don't want to just pontificate here. You guys could state your own opinions as well. So, what do you think of that? And to answer your second question, do Chinese people look down on black people? Do Chinese stereotype black people as scary people? If that's true, why is that? Well, in my experience, we actually had a few black teachers in the group that I was in. Um, Sorry, Nathan, I'll need to go soon. Need to try and investigate this a bit. Yeah, it sounds like it's just happened. You do what you need to do, Paul. I'm sorry to hear that. I know it's a real frustrating thing, and it's unpleasant thinking that someone violates your privacy that way. But do what you need to do. Maybe keep a low profile with comments just for a little while. I don't know. Maybe even temporarily delete your comments or something. It's shit that you need to do that, but your security is the most important thing. And the shitty thing is you can't know which individual is responsible, but unfortunately they are capable of. I can't offer any advice on the technical side, but I hope you get it resolved. And Ray, to answer your question, I was going to say in my orientation group we did have a few black teachers. There was a lady from South Africa and a thick Black American guy. And the president of the company was quite honest about this. He said there is a prejudice in China, but it was a pity because some African American teachers are great. They're very enthusiastic. They engage well with students. Um, there is a stereotype in China that an English teacher basically looks like me, a white European guy, um, which perhaps is causes a disadvantage for ethnic minority teachers. There was also a guy from Iran. Again, he was a good teacher, but just there's a perception there. He didn't have an accent. He spoke fluent English. He was a trained teacher, but there is a certain perception. I would say there is racist components. Definitely, there was a commercial a few years ago where it showed this woman stuffing a black guy literally into a laundrette, and then he came out as a Chinese guy, i.e., he was washed. Now that would not fly in the West. Um, there is less political correctness in China, that's for sure. So people are less sensitive about these things, generally speaking. Although there's a hypocrisy as well, because if the Chinese think they're being, racially offended, that's. I will say one thing. There's a Chinese word which basically, I'll say the word because it's Chinese, nigga, nigga. It's like an affirmation, like you're sort of noticing something, like we would say in English, oh, yes, that's right, something like that. Now, I could easily see that being misunderstood. So I actually said to the black teacher, look, if you hear that word, it's not what you think. Because I could speak a little Chinese, and I sort of wanted to reassure them. I didn't want them to be offended unnecessarily. So, but particularly older Chinese. I mean, you wouldn't get it with young Chinese, to be fair. In like millennial Chinese are quite cosmopolitan. I don't think they would necessarily take that view. Older Chinese are suspicious of all outsiders because they're Mao's generation. So yeah. But in terms, I mean, it's unlikely that we would actually attack a black guy, physically. You wouldn't get actual racial violence in terms of against outsiders. I'm not talking domestically speaking, is pretty rare. There was a few tensions in the city of Guangzhou where there were a lot of male African workers. And I know within Africa, the Belt and Road Initiative, there's been examples of tensions between Chinese and Africans because there's been examples of Chinese co-workers basically teaching the African rude things to say about themselves in Chinese, which is very disrespectful. And it's actually, yeah, I mean, there is that aspect. Um, and there's definitely, I'd say, the main racism in China with outsiders is more a curiosity. The real racism, if that's the right word, there's real tensions within China, for sure, although the government will never admit it. They have a mental health crisis, that's for sure. There's a lot of other things to comment on that. But anyway, I'll move on to the next one. Aaron. Evening, Aaron. Sorry, I missed your comment there. I remember when the late Prince Philip made jokes about the Chinese, everyone in the UK got offended. But when journalists asked people in China, they found the jokes funny. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's one thing about the Far East, people are not politically correct. I mean, they're sensitive in different ways. They're sensitive about anything to do with history, but not in the things that the West would be sensitive about. And that isn't just China. I think it's true also of both Koreas and Japan. They're just not as hypersensitive about those sort of things, which is good. It's refreshing. I think Philip didn't just make jokes about the Chinese, though. One of his many slips of the tongue was they were visiting Kenya early in Elizabeth II's reign, and he said it's a nice hat and was actually a tribal crown. I did hear it said, though, that this wasn't Philip being jingoistic or something. It was his way of trying to ease tensions. I don't know if that's true or not. Well, sometimes I think he could be a bit. There was one time Philip publicly condemned this child's handwriting in the school, and I thought it was a bit uncalled for, like, humiliating a child or scolding a child from the consort of the monarchs a bit. So there's times I think Philip was a little bit arrogant in that sense. But yeah, there's definitely a different attitude in terms of political correctness and sensitivities, but they are sensitive in other areas. And the funny thing is, when the Chinese come to the West, then they'll adopt our PC attitudes to things, particularly when they want to play the victim. I've personally had Chinese acquaintances who sort of said, "Oh, it's because I'm Chinese," and I'm like, "No, it's just their policy," something like that. So you will get this situation. I've seen it with some Indians as well, who will come to the West and play up actually Western PC that they wouldn't have in their own countries. I remember a few years ago, there was a Chinese guy shot by the police in Paris. Well, he pulled a knife on a police officer, but the local Chinese there were up in arms and protesting, as if the officer in that case didn't have a right to defend himself. Now, each case on its own merit, but on that, I remember feeling on that occasion, well, what are they complaining about? The guy attacked the officer, but each case on its own merit, of course. So yeah, you're right, Aaron. There is a different attitude there for sure. Second, guys, just get some more warm water. Welcome, Alan. Thoughts on the ISIS attack that happened in Russia? Well, it's a big story, isn't it? I'll just be 1 second, just get more hot water, and I'll come straight back. So good question, Alon. My first thoughts were it looks very similar to three other terrorist attacks. One was the Moscow theatre siege of 2002. Another was the Bataclan theatre siege in Paris, 2015. And the third one was the Manchester Arena bombing of 2017. And that made me think, yeah, that's probably Islamist in nature, probably ISIS. And indeed, ISIS claim responsibility. It is true that ISIS have a tendency, Al Qaeda done the same thing of claiming responsibility for every terror attack, sort of bigging themselves. They are still a very dangerous force. What's interesting is, well, of course, predictably, Putin and particularly Medvedev immediately blamed Ukraine with zero evidence. What I would be very cautious about is the attackers have been caught alive and they've probably been tortured. So I wouldn't put it past the Russian authorities to try and bribe them somehow to say that they were funded by Ukraine or something as yet another excuse to further their brutal war on the Ukrainian people. The same day as that attack, they cut off power to millions of people, directly hit power stations, I believe. But yeah, my first thought was this looks like an Islamist attack. Moscow's had no shortage of terrorism over the years. I counted the other day, there was at least 6 different major terror attacks in Moscow since in this millennium, from the apartment bombings in 1999, the Moscow theatre siege. The metro there has been hit several times. So it's like London, it's a city that's suffered a lot of terrorism. What's interesting is the men who've been caught are all ethnic Tajiks. Russia's had a difficult relationship with its Central Asian neighbors. Within Russia, they tend to be a polarized community. Now, don't get me wrong, ruthless terrorists have no sympathy with them. And this is the thing about terrorists. I mean, why target a concert? Why not a military barracks or something if they really believe in their war or whatever motivation they have? And what would the motivation be? Probably Russia's support of Assad in Syria, most likely. I remember in 2016 when the Russian ambassador to Turkey, I think his name was Andrei Karlov, was assassinated. So a lot of that comes down to Russia's role in Syria. No justification, of course. It's a terrorist atrocity. But it is a disgrace that the Putin regime will try and use this as a way to further vilify the Ukrainians, who have nothing to do with it. And from a practical point of view, it wouldn't make sense for Ukraine to have anything to do with it because there's uncertainty over funding, particularly from the United States. So why would the Ukrainians risk, losing support? It just wouldn't make any sense. So I mean, the footage of those men being questioned, they look petrified and they've probably been tortured. So I don't know if the authorities are going to try and exploit this because the men were caught alive. I'm really not sure. Do you have any thoughts on it, Alon, about anything that's transpired? I do think it's incredibly similar to the Paris attack in terms of the target, in terms of the style of attack and so on. So it definitely bears the hallmarks of... The thing about ISIS, they're a big organization, so they will get local Islamists, in this case from Central Asia. Those republics are impoverished, so they're ripe for radicalization. Tajikistan went through a brutal civil war in the 90s. Countries like that are ripe for radicalization, I think. A Russian friend of mine says terrorism around election times in the country is normal. That's interesting. Yeah, and I wouldn't put anything past Putin's regime. I'm not going to get into conspiracy theories, but I have a book by the spy Alexander Litvinenko called Blowing Up Russia. It's right beside me here. In fact, once I dry my hands, I'll show you guys. Now, in that, Litvinenko does allege that the FSB was responsible for the apartment bombings of 1999 in order to justify the Second Chechen War, which would make sense. I would not put anything past the Russian authorities. That doesn't mean that it wasn't an Islamist attack. It may well be. But, I wouldn't put anything past the Russian authorities. I'm going to show you that book, actually. Ray, bear with me a second. Okay. So I don't know if you guys can see this. In fact, I just have a black screen. Yeah, I just have a black screen. I can't see myself. Okay, guys, can you see this book? Yeah, it's called Banned in Russia, Blowing Up Russia. There's Litvinenko after his poisoning. You do see it? Okay, good. I can't see myself, so I don't know what you guys could see or not. But yeah, I'm kind of proud of the fact it's banned in Russia. I ordered that years ago. It's I haven't. I'm a slow reader, but it's basically all about the FSBs and nefarious activities. Aaron, your point about them being Tajiks and not Chechens, I would have been surprised a while back, but then we need to consider how Russia's pacified Chechnya. The current president of Chechnya is a Putin puppet, Ramzan Kadyrov, and he rules the place with an iron fist. He's a former Islamist. I think his father was assassinated in an internal struggle. Um, so, in that sense, also Chechnya, outwardly, it looks a lot better than it did 20 years ago. There's been investment. It's now got casinos, and it's well, not casinos, but it's a lot of the buildings have been fixed up. It looks a little bit like the Gulf states, but behind that facade is one of the world's worst human rights records. I remember this woman was dragged on TV because she'd apparently insulted Kadyrov, and she had to issue this groveling apology. That's the sort of regime he runs. I mean, he's a thug. Um, so Tajikistan, on the other hand, Russia has a lot of influence on those Central Asian republics, but not as much as it would like. I remember there was unrest in Kazakhstan in early 2022 before the Ukrainian invasion, and again there were questions over Russia's role in that. Um, but certainly there's been Islamists from those republics in the past, so I'm not overly surprised by that. Let's see. Ray, hi Nathan, how Donald Trump support put in when America and Russia do say eye to eye in political. I'm sorry, I'm not quite following Ray. Do say eye to eye in political that put in needs to go to Russia, doesn't he? I'm sorry, buddy, I'm not quite following that. If you could just type that again, please. I'm just not getting what you're asking there. The New Cold War by Edward Lucas is a good book on Russia. It's nearly 10 years old, but I think I remember that one being published. Another good one I read recently was Mafia State by the journalist Luke Harding. He was the Guardian's Russia correspondent, and the book's next door, so I won't get it. But basically, he wrote about how the FSB harassed him, not violently, but they do things like break into his flat in Moscow and move things around as a sort of psychological thing. They revoked his press pass on some trivial thing. And this was before things were really bad. I'm talking the late 2010s, when supposedly the Medvedev administration was more conciliatory towards the West. But basically, they told him he had to leave. And then at the last minute, said, oh, he could stay after all, knowing that he'd already taken his child out of the local school. So this is typical FSB tactics, psychological. It's not always physical. And when he mentioned it to the British Embassy, they said they also have the same thing. And the only advice they could give was to kind of ignore it, like being trailed by people and that sort of thing. But certainly an eye opener, that book. It showed even then when things were much better than they are now. I often wonder about the journalist Steve Rosenberg, the BBC's main man in Moscow. He must be, I don't know. I mean, he's a good reporter. He never self censors, but he surely must tread carefully, being the BBC's main correspondent in Moscow. I often wonder about the position he's in. Remember a few weeks ago he confronted Margarita Simonian, or not confronted her. He asked her questions, and of course she got very hawkish and blamed the West as she always does. That's RT CEO, I believe she is. I call her the Joseph Goebbels of Putin's regime. One of them, anyway. Awful woman. Anyway, hi. Okay, excuse me. The dragonflies sounds like they try to drive you mad. Yeah, they do. I think that's the strategy. It's almost like that thing, gaslighting, trying to convince the victim that they're going mad, because it won't be physical. They won't, there won't be some thugs in a back alley beat them up. They're more subtle than that. It's just a psychological thing. But that book was quite an eye-opener. I'm actually, to be honest, I'm surprised the Russian government even allows the BBC to operate there. Kind of thought they'd retaliate after we blocked RT, but apparently not. BBC, of course, has a much bigger outreach. Hi, Nathan. What I meant to say was, how can Donald Trump's support put in when America and Russia don't see eye to eye? Putin should not be Russian president. Russia doesn't need him. Yeah, well, I've always seen Trump as a Putin puppet anyway. I mean, it's true that the State Department expelled Russians during Trump's tenure, but Trump himself has always been reluctant to condemn Putin, no matter what the situation. So I absolutely don't trust Trump's ties to Russia. And I think there may well be credible evidence that Russia did indeed interfere in the 2016 election, the 2020 election, and almost certainly will try this year. No doubt there'll be a lot of misinformation spun about Ukraine and the Ukrainians to try and, create animosity against them. So I am not looking forward to the prospects of a second Trump term. Some of the supporters say, well, or not supporters, but those who don't share my concern will say, well, Trump's unpredictable, so, it may well be that he looks sick of Russia if he's now, but then they'll change tune when in office. But the problem is Ukraine and the Baltic states and others need some reassurance. With a president who flip-flops, who's unpredictable. If Trump's strategy is to confuse the Russians, I don't know if it's a great strategy overall, because it also polarizes allies. I don't know. The conspiracy theories of ISIS being a US and Israeli proxy are already trending on Twitter again. Why am I not surprised? Yeah, and here's the thing, Alon. It's I expect it from, the usual sources like Russian nationalists, Chinese nationalists. What I've been disappointed by recently, I don't know if you've noticed this, but Indian media has adopted a very anti-West position recently. Not so much NDTV, but I don't know if you know WION News, presented by Palki Sharma. It's the overtones of that. It just sounds like RT sometimes. I mean, they regurgitate the Kremlin's propaganda. They always raise questions about the West. There's a real anti-West narrative in certain Indian outlets, and I wonder why. I mean, India presents itself as neutral on Russia and Ukraine. I know they've deep trade with Russia, but to me, it's a failure of the world's biggest democracy. And I think there's an arrogance. I've seen Indian nationalists get hyped up, even when the BBC had a positive report about India's economic growth. Even a positive report attracted the ire of these nationalists, like, BBC is jealous. They no longer have an empire, all this sort of stuff. So there's a real reactionary nationalism from some Indians. And some of their media is behaving. I remember when Rishi Sunak became Prime Minister, they had these absurd headlines. Son of India rises over the empire. He was born in Southampton, but yeah, so I'm a little bit, I don't entirely trust India right now, to be quite honest. Could it be they give him an easier time to give a kind of Berlin Olympics false impression of Putin's Russia? Do you mean sorry, I don't follow who you mean there, Dragonfly? Could it be they'd give him an easier time to give a kind of Berlin Olympics false impression of Putin's Russia? India and the Soviet Union were always closely linked by trade. That's true, yeah. I mean, Indira Gandhi was very close to Brezhnev, whereas in the Cold War, Pakistan was pro-West, ironically enough, for an Islamic country. So a lot of that is down to Cold War politics, but I'm not sure if that fully explains it. I mean, the Cold War has been over for 30 years. So I wonder, is it still a trade issue, or The thing is, if there's any conflict, major conflict, regional conflict between India and China, India shouldn't burn bridges. I think there is an aspect of India is fast growing, and there's a bit of smugness there, like, oh, we're won over on a former colony. But India shouldn't be too complacent. They still have a lot of problems, and if they want Western support on a situation like any conflict with China, then this sort of hysterical nationalism that they're or Western phobia, I would put it, is not very practical. Try to balance this out without breaking it. It's always a great balancing out with these cups. Screen keeps going black for some reason. I think I need to touch it occasionally. It's good you guys can still see me. I can't see anything. Okay. I was living in Moscow when Litvinenko was murdered. Part of my job was working at Deutsche Bank. I asked my students about it, and they were certain Putin wasn't involved. I'd never heard of the BBC. I'd never thought of that, but this changed my view. Yeah, I mean the level of indoctrination in Russia. I've not been to Russia, but I've been to China, and I'd imagine it's somewhat similar in terms of the depth of I think what we underestimate in the West is just how deep nationalism runs in those countries. I mean, it's like a religion. It is deeply, deeply entrenched in the national psyche. In the case of Russia, that's somewhat understandable given the extent of casualties in World War II, although they conveniently forget that Stalin and Hitler were allied until 1941. Let's see. Yes, that's what sounds like gaslighting. The BBC correspondent. Yeah. Those conspiracy theories do make me laugh, as you know, the ISIS leadership is seeing them and tearing the little emojis appearing, tearing their hair out at people viewing them as Israeli puppets. Yeah, it's sort of an irony, isn't it? Imagine hardcore Islamists who hate Jews being described as Israeli puppets. It must drive them crazy. We have to be careful in Western Europe as well. It isn't inconceivable there could be another attack. I know the French and Belgian authorities have put their anti-terror warning system, or whatever it would be the right way to describe it, up. This isn't really to do with terrorism. I saw video footage earlier of I'll call him an Islamist staff member in Asda, basically berating this woman for wearing for the clothes she was wearing, saying that she was showing her whole body and what she's doing. It's a public place and so on. Now that might sound trivial compared to the things we'd be talking about, but I do think that Europe generally still has a serious problem with Islamism, and I do not trust that Keir Starmer's Labour Party is prepared to talk about it. I mean, he'll point out that he's prosecuted terrorists as head of the CPS, but there's a real reactionary attitude in Labour ranks when the idea of Islamism is even discussed. The way they treated Lee Anderson, for example. See, hi Nefa, do you think it's time for Britain to legalise assisted dying like Canada and Switzerland? What's your views on it? I'll be honest, I didn't know Canada had actually legalised euthanasia. I knew about Switzerland, I didn't know. I don't know. This is I don't have strong views on this, Ray, but it's a great thing. One thing I am convinced about, I'll say this, whether it's legal or not, I certainly don't think, let's say you have an 85-year-old man who helps to end the life of his 83-year-old terminally ill wife. I certainly don't think you should have a dozen police cars show up and treat him like some sort of dangerous criminal. I think it needs to be seen very differently than a murder where you get like a mugging or something like that. It's a difficult one. I mean, if someone is in such agony from their disease or their condition that they have no quality of life, then I am tempted to say they have a right to make that decision to end their own life. I certainly don't think it should be in the same. If it is going to be illegal, I don't agree with prosecuting relatives as if they're some sort of dangerous criminals or murderers in that way. Um, it's a grey one, though. I honestly don't know. What do you think about it, Ray? Are you in favour of euthanasia or not? I do see the argument for it, but I can also see maybe it could be argued that if someone's in physical pain, they're not thinking clearly, and therefore it's like, we always talk against suicide. Like in society, there's mental health support to talk people out of suicide. So I suppose the argument would be, well, why talk people out of suicide but support euthanasia? But the issue there is, if someone is in such physical discomfort that their life is unbearable, what right have others to deny them the chance to end life as they would see it, with dignity? It's a difficult one. I mean, I really, really sympathize with anyone in that position who has a partner in that situation, or maybe a parent, and they know that they could be prosecuted, but they don't want to see their loved one going through that suffering. It's a terrible situation for anyone to be in. But I am convinced that if a relative helps them to carry it out, they should not be treated like a dangerous criminal. There should be an understanding of the context involved therein. I think that's a slippery slope and is to be avoided. You talk about euthanasia, the dragonfly. Yeah, I mean, it's like I say, context is everything. I certainly don't think it should be, openly sort of encouraged, but I personally think where the situation is so bad that the person is in absolute agony, who can reasonably say that person should just continue living when they're in physical agony? That isn't. I mean, that's the question I have for you, the dragonfly. If you're against it, and I don't have strong views on this issue. I do see both sides, but if you're against it, what would your solution be for someone who is in constant physical pain and the drugs aren't doing enough to ease that pain? I mean, can you not see that there's a case that they would want to be out of that pain? And what right do we have, as assume you're able-bodied, I am, like what right would we have to deny them that? I guess that's the question. Because we can be complacent, we're not in physical pain. The suspects that the Russian authorities showed in the media, the 4 tortured men, didn't look like those in the attack video. Yeah, I was thinking that. In the video, they looked a bit bulkier, a bit. I mean, obviously they had masks and stuff on, but the guys in the video, they were clearly terrified. They looked shaken up. I don't know. They did look Tajiks. They looked like they looked like Central Asian ethnicity. Who knows? In the video, they did look a bit more bulky, but then this is a rare case of Islamists being caught alive. In most cases, I don't know if something went wrong. I am surprised they were caught, because supposedly there was an explosion. So that's a bit unusual for an Islamist attack. The fact they were caught alive, that's very rare. I was reading the memoirs of Pervez Musharraf, the former dictator of Pakistan, recently, and one of his assassins, the guy's face had been blown off. It looked like a mask, but it was actually the guy's face had been blown off, and that's how they identified him. He was an attempted assassin of Pervez Musharraf in the early 2000s. I can see the case, but I fear legalizing any of it could open up the floodgates. I don't like the idea of humans playing God. But that's the thing. I mean, you say opening up the floodgates, but I imagine if it was legalized, there'd be strict red lines. I don't think it would be a case of, well, anyone could just end their own life. I mean, I don't think it would be a case that someone's in a bit of discomfort and they want to end their own life. I think the threshold will be very, very high. It's very similar to the abortion debate, I actually think the situation in the UK is probably about right, because it's not total legalization. I am uncomfortable with allowing abortion, like total green light, for example, up to the point where the fetus is developing organs and stuff. But I also understand, if a woman's been raped, if she's a victim of incest, and indeed if her health is an issue. So I think UK's abortion laws are probably about right. About the right level, not too extreme in one direction or the other, but likewise a very emotive issue. That's all I would say, the Dragonfly. I appreciate your concerns, but I imagine if it was legalized, there'd be strict thresholds. I don't think they'd let anyone just go for it. I think there'd have to be thresholds to cross. I think, for example, the person's mental competency would be a key factor. If they had some sort of learning difficulties, the question would be, can they really decide for themselves? There'd be things like that. But I'm uncomfortable with the idea of denying people a choice when they're in such physical pain. I mean, surely that's degrading their human rights to basically say, oh, well, you have to just keep suffering when you're in such physical pain. I'm not sure about that. But I do appreciate your concerns. The shooters look much more bulky. I thought so as well. The suspects look like they could bury the guns. Well, bear in mind, apparently one of them was forced to eat his own ear. They were tortured, so it could just be that. At least they were purportedly tortured. The guys did look like they had a lot of marks on their bodies. It may well be that they'll probably have to go through some big show trial in which they'll probably implicate Ukraine. The authorities will probably say, okay, you'll be spared the death penalty if you blame Ukraine. Or I wouldn't put it past the Russian authorities. Sorry, the screens went black yet again. I suppose if there were strict guidelines and laws on it, but I'd still not rather go down that road. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think with any new legislation, there has to be very, very careful considerations of every aspect of it. I wouldn't be totally against legalizing it to some extent, but I do appreciate what you're saying about. I mean, I took this view with drugs. Sorry, this is a slightly different issue, but the reason I oppose legalizing all drugs, advocates for that say, oh well, it will make criminal gangs, it'll make them lose profit. But the problem is, we at the moment, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but we currently have a lot of extensive campaigns to stop people smoking, because we know if people smoke tobacco, they get lung cancer. You know, the government's trying very hard to make that a generational ending, phasing out from a generational point of view. So it seems a bit of a paradox to spend a lot on stopping people smoking, but then saying, well, we'll legalize marijuana, because then it would just have to be the same thing. There'd have to be health campaigns against marijuana because it's been linked to schizophrenia, for example. So for me, on the drugs issue, I know I brought that one up, but I don't like the idea of normalizing cocaine and heroin. Advocates would say it makes it safer from the street stuff. But there is another point with the drug thing. People shouldn't break the law. I mean, I'm sympathetic to people who are spiked or pressured into it, but people who do illegal drugs recreationally have much less sympathy for. They're knowingly breaking the law. So I don't like in the drugs debate the cavalier attitude to, oh, well, everyone does it. Actually, they don't. Some of us don't want to put dangerous chemicals in our bodies. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent there, but yeah, I mean, I appreciate your concerns, Dragonfly, but for me, I don't like the idea of people suffering when they may not have to. But it's one of those issues, I should say, I don't have strong views on it. You know, some things I'm pretty stubborn and I have strong convictions. With the euthanasia one, same with abortion, I genuinely see both sides. Legalizing drugs is a dreadful idea. I think consumption and therefore mental illness would increase. It's helpful for society to say this behavior is unacceptable. I totally agree, Paul, but unfortunately, there is a lot of voices out there that think, oh, you know, the narrative is this: the war on drugs has failed, so let's just legalize them all and have a big party. The problem I have with that camp is they downplay how these things fuck up people's lives, to put it bluntly. Um, and they can say they're not promoting drugs, but effectively by legalizing them, they are saying it's harmless, or at least not as dangerous as. That's the point. Legalizing something does imply it's less dangerous than it is. That's my problem with legalizing all drugs, because it sends out that message of normalizing it, and I don't think they should ever be normalized. Um, Dope smoking definitely causes psychosis, and that's not something you want to get. Exactly. I mean, people act as if cannabis is harmless. It absolutely is not. I am somewhat sympathetic to the arguments about medicinal cannabis. If that is proven to be effective, I'd be somewhat sympathetic to that. But I just think if cannabis is legalized, then there's going to be a situation where you have to get into campaigns similar to anti-smoking campaigns. I wouldn't jail someone for having possession of cannabis. That's one thing I would diverge with. Although I'm hardline on crime, I probably wouldn't jail someone for simple drug possession unless they've used violence to get it. But I totally agree, Paul. I have a problem with the normalization of these dangerous, evil substances, especially hard ones. Like, I mean, the way it fucks people up. I've seen rough sleepers in my city who are obviously heroin addicts. Heroin was legal in Britain in the 50s, as late as the 50s. I know before that, I didn't think it would be as late as the 50s, but regardless, I don't think anyone's going to rationally argue there's anything good about heroin. Do you believe Israel's going to go into Rafah? I think they might. I think Netanyahu said that he wants American support, but he's prepared to do it without American support. And I think that's a big mistake because Israel is fast losing support. I do think there's hawks in the Israeli cabinet who don't care. Their attitude is this is a fight for survival. Whether we've got support or not, we'll just do what we want. But Israel has to remember it's funded by the West. And, actually, Britain has halted funding in the past. Interestingly enough, under two prime ministers people might not expect. Margaret Thatcher in 1982 and Tony Blair in 2002. The two very prime ministers people would probably think were very pro-Israel. So it's happened before. I do think if this continues, the problem with our position is people will think we're just blindly supportive of Israel, even though Sunak and Biden have expressed concerns about some of the things that are going on. So maybe we need to go further and actually say to the Israelis, the more civilian casualties mount, we're not going to give you a blank check here. I do think it's very, very different from Ukraine in that sense. But I also get frustrated with those who ignore how this began on October the 7th. I mean the latest escalation. I don't mean the wider war. No, definitely not. I was surprised it was still legal up to them. Yeah. I'm surprised by that, for sure. The Dragonfly, you're from Ulster as well. I remember when I was at school there, they gave us these little flyers because, as you'll know, parts of Northern Ireland has a serious drug problem around Ballymena. That area, it's quite deprived, serious drug problems around there. And the flyer was it was well put together. It showed each different street drug, heroin, ecstasy, etc. And yeah, I've still got that, kind of kept that as a souvenir, so to speak. Admittedly, I once did smoke a joint, but honestly, it didn't have much of an effect on me. I thought this is overrated. What's a big deal? Maybe I smoked it wrong, but I just couldn't see the big hype over it. I really couldn't. But yeah, I mean, it's just common sense. If you put chemicals into your body constantly, at some point that's going to have a bad effect. So guys, one reason I'm doing this live stream is the video issue. So if you're wondering why I haven't uploaded a video, and please, we spoke about the Moscow thing because that would naturally be one of the things I would have been talking about. I still might, because obviously, there's a lot fewer people come to a live stream than watch the videos. My average video might be 60, 70 views, and let's say we have half a dozen people turn up to the live stream. So ideally, I'd like to make the videos as well. But I also value these live streams because it's an opportunity to directly engage. You see, I can't get back to every single comment. So I appreciate the opportunity to do this. Yes, Ballymena is very bad. I remember that. I got it at secondary school, I think. Still have it somewhere too. Yeah, I think we all did around the late 90s. We were about the same age, so it's probably around the same time. In the 90s when there was those sort of raves, particularly the early 90s, but the late 90s as well. Ballymena is not a town I like. I always have memories of that town being quite rough, quite interestingly enough, it was relatively spared to sectarian stuff. It's very Protestant, of course, but I mean, yeah, it's a town with a lot of problems, I think. It reminds me a little bit of like Bridgend in South Wales. I think it could be a depressing place for young people. My cousin lives out there and he has problems, let's just say. Right, we'll wrap this up. It's bizarre. I have my own anecdote about Ballymena. You're well traveled, Paul. You seem to have been everywhere. You've been to Russia. You think you've been to China as well. What's your anecdote about Ballymena? I visited Ireland once. It was 1995. Northern Ireland, you mean? That's the thing about Ulster people. We get quite 95. That's actually the year I moved to Bushmills. I was born in Belfast, but I moved to Bushmills at that time. Aaron, let's see. In the Bond novel Goldfinger, Bond starts the story having just returned from a mission in Mexico where it destroyed a heroin factory whose heroin had just been made illegal in the UK. Interesting. I've never read the novel, so that Goldfinger, the movie, was made in 64, so I guess the book would have been mid-50s some point. Sorry, Paul, please continue with your story. My brother got married there. Sorry, guys, sometimes like I try to keep on track. I value all the comments, but just to kind of keep things consistent. My brother got married there. I was actually withdrawing from drugs. Goodness. I really liked the little of the place I saw. We also went to the Giant's Causeway. You're kidding me. You're from Bushmills, Dragonfly. My goodness, it is a small world. Yeah. Lived there for 5 years. 1995 to 2000. My goodness. And for you other guys watching, Bushmills is a small place, about 3,000 people. Small town, large village. Famous for its whiskey, of course. But so that's a small world, my goodness. Yeah, I remember the smells of the distillery in Bushmills, and I'll be honest with Dragonfly, I didn't have a great time there. I had quite a rough time with bullying, but at Dunluce, you'll know Dunluce School. It had serious bullying problem, at least when I was there. It did. Did you go to Dunluce? I mean, that's incredible. I knew you were from Northampton, but that really does narrow it down. Let's see. Hi Nathan, you did bring drugs topic before. Should cannabis be legalized because people say cannabis is not as harmful as alcohol? We've just been talking about this, Ray. I don't know if you got cut off there, mate, but I've just been discussing that. Put it this way, I'd be more sympathetic to legalizing cannabis than any hard drug, but even then, I have a problem with the idea that cannabis is harmless. It certainly isn't. Alcohol, I mean, you have to go into any town or city at night time and see the problems that alcohol causes, but realistically, we're not going to ban alcohol. The only thing I would say about drugs, people always say, oh, well, smoking and drinking kills, but we don't ban those. Yeah, but the point is drinking, there's strict age limits, and smoking is gradually phasing out. So it's a bit of a lazy argument when people say, oh, well, let's just legalize all drugs because they're legal. We know the problems with alcohol, and we know the problems with smoking. With drugs, it's more, there's a lot of other nuances with different drugs. I would cautiously be okay with legalizing medicinal cannabis, but it would have to be really, what's the word? Not curtailed, really regulated. I'd be cautiously okay with that, but I wouldn't want a situation where it was normalized. Because, recreational cannabis can be as dangerous as any other drug. What school did you go to? I went to Dunluce. I wasn't born in Bushmill, so I was born in Belfast, and I lived in Hillsborough, County Down, when I was a toddler. I found the people at Ballymena much friendlier than the English. That's interesting. It's a funny thing, Paul, because often,
people visiting Northern Ireland talk about how friendly it was. I'll be honest, and no disrespect here, the Dragonfly. I had a rough time. I was badly bullied where I lived. Um, so I don't have entirely good memories of Northern Ireland for that reason. But it's often people, like I live near a World Heritage Site, the Giant's Causeway. The Dragonfly will know what I'm talking about. It is stunning. It's beautiful. It's made from volcanic rock over millions of years. But there's a local story about giants between Scotland and Ireland. It's a famous local story. But the whole time I was there, I didn't visit there that much. So often live near something, you don't visit it. Like I imagine Londoners hardly ever go to the Tower of London, for example. Dundas was terrible for bullying, sadly. Yeah, so you know that as well. I guess I had a reputation. I suppose most schools do, but it was pretty rough. Then I got bullied again when I came to England. I've had my. If you're 39, yeah, I was probably the year below you. I would ask your real name, the Dragonfly. I am curious, but that's obviously up to you if you want to disclose that or not. Uh, Cannabis is about 10 times harder than it used to be. That's interesting. That's interesting. I mean, I don't know if that's what they're putting in it now, but I certainly think that, if you're putting any drug into your system constantly, it can't have a good effect. I was at Dundas, yes, you might have been. All right, we've read that bit. Let's see. I know that fact from Goldfinger 2, the novel was published in 1959. I really need to start reading the Bond novels. Certainly, all the Craig ones, I think, were new creations, not from the original Ian Fleming's. And talking of Bond, what do you guys think of Aaron Taylor Johnson? It seems almost certain that he is the new Bond now. They just haven't made the formal announcement. I've never heard of the guy. I've just seen pictures of him, but I really don't know him at all. So they never try it, so they never get addicted. I definitely wouldn't legalize cannabis. One of the reasons so few Chinese people are addicted to drugs is because they have such little access to it. Yeah. There's also, I think, historic stigma from the Opium Wars. They see it as a Western and sort of influence. And having said that, I was in Guilin. You may be familiar with that place, Paul, in Guangxi region. And Guilin's a little bit hedonistic. There's a lot of bars there, a lot of nightclubs. It's a bit like Phuket in Thailand, although it's inland. And there's definitely drug use there because the local police are lazy. They kind of turn a blind eye to it, or they just pay it off or something. But obviously, as with most of East Asia, the penalties for drug offences are very severe, right up to the death penalty. So that could be the other reason people don't mess around, because it is severe consequences there. Yeah, like I say, if for me it would be very, very conditional, the medicinal cannabis, um, for people who may be in physical discomfort. But I have a problem with the normalization of any drugs. Um, let's see, I can't recall you there, but I might remember the name. I'm Nathan Hazlett. That's my full name. And obviously, you can see what I look like, but we're talking 20 years ago now. I do still have like a yearbook from 1998, so I might, yeah, you might be there. Let's see here, guys. Led Zeppelin, Houses of the Holy. Sorry, Paul, we're a bit behind here. What's that a reference to? Just scrolling back a little bit. Led Zeppelin, House of the Holy. Is that, I imagine, there's drug references there? Or I was bullied there a lot too, verbal bullying. Yeah, I mean, the thing about a small place like Bushmill is everyone knows who you are, so it could be sometimes worse in rural areas. I found the Bond novels really disappointing. The films are better. That's interesting. Sometimes that is the case. I mean, I don't know if you've ever read Peter Benchley's Jaws. It's not a great read, to be honest. It's none of the characters are particularly sympathetic. Chief Brody's got a real temper problem. His wife's adulteress. Um, None of the characters are redeemable in the end. You end up rooting for the shark. I'm also reading Jurassic Park right now. It's okay, but it's a little bit, the prose isn't wonderful. And there was a bit near the start, which basically I'll show you. Yeah, so I've got Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park. He sort of says, and then they went to San Jose, which is the capital of Costa Rica. It's a little bit like that prose to me. It's like, well, people can assume that. You wouldn't really say which is the capital of Costa. It's a little bit, I don't know, just the style of writing. I'm not saying it's terrible, but it's a little bit of sort of books adapted to films. One of the best actually was The Exorcist that I read by his name eludes me now, but I thought that was better prose than Jurassic Park and Jaws. I'm not talking about the story, but the prose. It was just well written, really engaging. Um, Damn, forget the guy's name now. The director was William Friedkin. William Peter Blatty. William Peter Blatty, who wrote The Exorcist. That, for me, was written better than Jaws and Jurassic Park. Both Jaws and Jurassic Park were much better on screen. The Exorcist was far more graphic even in the novel than it was on screen. Just saw a bit of the new Maverick. Couldn't stick it for more than 40 minutes. The new Maverick, is that something Aaron Taylor Johnson's been in? I'm not familiar with that. He seems a good pick for Bond. I'm glad they didn't pick Idris Elba or Jason Statham. Yeah, I mean, Elba's too old, and Statham, I don't think is a great actor. I think he's quite one-dimensional. I mean, for me, Jason Statham is just the tough guy. I've never seen him do a serious role other than some action flick. He's always some like tough gaffer, in my bad London accent. I mean, he does what he does. He's a tough guy. He was good in the Meg, but I can't see just the thing about Bond. Yes, there's action. Yes, there's toughness, but there is also a bit of a story there, and there has to be a level that I don't know. But I hadn't actually heard that Jason Statham was named. Interestingly enough. Then again, Roger Moore wasn't a great actor. He always admitted that himself, but he had the certain suaveness, which did go with Bond. And I actually like some of Moore's films. I like Live and Let Die, but I confess I had a very soft spot for Jane Seymour. Absolutely gorgeous in that film. It used to also scare me, Live and Let Die, because in Northern Ireland, you might know this, the Dragonfly, they used to play Bond movies around Easter Monday, or I used to see those ads on UTV like 007 Easter Monday. Anyway, if you guys have seen Live and Let Die, you'll know there's a big reference to the Tonton Makute in Haiti, present day Haiti, although Haiti isn't mentioned in the film, but they show the Baron Samedi cackling at the end of the train. At the end, that used to scare me like hell when I was a child. Let's see. I wanted to go to Guilin and Yangshuo, but never did. My company was based in Yangshuo. Actually, it is stunningly beautiful part of the world. The film, The Painted Veil, set in the 1920s with Ed Norton and Naomi Watts, is set there. I think Avatar was partly based on the landscape there. If you ever get back to China, that region really is worth visiting. It's very unique limestone mountains right in the town. Casino Royale was based on the first Ian Fleming novel. Yeah, that's true. Spectre also used a scene from Colonel Son of Bond continuation novel. Parts of No Time to Die were inspired by Ian Fleming. Oh, I stand corrected. I knew Casino Royale had been done as a spoof in the 60s, and certainly Spectre is mentioned in From Russia with Love. But I think maybe actually it's the Brosnan one I'm thinking of. Tomorrow Never Dies, The World Is Not Enough. Maybe it's those that weren't based on the novels. Although The World Is Not Enough, I think, was the motto on the Skyfall Mansion, something like that. Because Brosnan's Bond says, oh, family motto in The World Is Not Enough at one point. And Brian McCaig. Yeah, I don't know the name, Brian, I must admit, but it has been over 20 years. I may be nosy and look up that old Done This album, see if you're there. But nothing to worry about, It's just a local thing, like a school album thing. But small world. So welcome to the channel. I'm currently rereading the Bond novels at the moment. I'm enjoying them so far. Diamonds Are Forever, the fourth book, which I'm currently reading, is better than I remembered. I also know, like for example, they had Octopussy and the Living Daylights amalgamated as one book, whereas we know they were separate films. It's the same actually with Jurassic Park. For example, there's aspects of The Lost World and Jurassic Park 3 in the novel Jurassic Park, because I think there was only a single novel, there wasn't sequel novels. I just read Dracula. It started well, but was super boring when the action moved from Transylvania to London. You mean the original Bram Stoker version? I think, in all honesty, some Victorian novels could be a bit convoluted. They tend to be more detailed on what we would consider relatively small matters. Dickens, Dickens is like Marmite. I mean, a lot of Dickens novels, he spends a page talking about some trivial thing, yet the characters are great. So I'm not sure if Victorian literature is always that accessible today. William Peter Blatter, you're right. And guys, I really need to use the bathroom, so I will, if you excuse me for 5 minutes, do stay by if you can. Um, let's see, Stefan will make a great Bond parody. Yeah, parody for sure. That's a movie begging to be made. I mean, no harm to Jason Statham. I just don't think the guy's a great actor. I think he's quite one-dimensional. He's a tough guy. He'd be a good Bond villain actually, or a henchman. I just can't see him getting a lot of depth there. Top Gun Maverick with Tom Cruise, mental age of 8.5. Yes, UTV was where I became a Bond fan. Then I went on to the Bond novels, which are brilliant. Yeah, UTV is to show them. For the other guys, UTV is sort of a regional station in Northern Ireland, Ulster Television. They had some good productions, actually. Yes, Brosnan didn't really have any Fleming material to work with. I like Brosnan. I grew up with Brosnan's Bonds. So he had to improvise a lot. That's something people forget when they criticize Brosnan. He had to improvise with new material. Not improvise, but it's not like he could just turn to a novel and base his character on that. Okay, guys, just give me 4 minutes. I really do need the bathroom. So I will come back in 4 minutes. Don't leave the channel. Talk among yourselves if you like. 4 minutes. Hey guys, let's see. TV, Living That Down, my favorite Bond book and my favorite Roger Moore film. Yeah, it's probably my favorite Moore film as well, although I'm biased because, well, Jane Seymour helps. Uh, Apparently, though, originally the female protagonist was going to be a black woman, and I wonder, did they play it carefully? bearing in mind the 70s, interracial relations were still taboo, although they'd done it in Star Trek. So Solitaire was originally going to be a black woman, apparently. But it's a good example of the blaxploitation genre, I think. Live and Let Die. Quite a unique film. Let's see. I had a short story in the 2000 magazine, but I don't think I had anything in the 1998 one. Yeah. Well, I left in 2000, so I'll check it out anyway. It might, I think it was 98, it might be 99. In fact, the Dragonfly, if you bear with me 1 second, I'll show you exactly what I've got. Odyssey and TLD with the full title, and The Living Daylights. That's the one, thank you. But now it consists of 4 short stories and is now just called Octopussy. You mean it's been rewritten? Like, because I know you get a lot of Ian Fleming's estate has sort of allowed other writers to take on the mantle. I love the Dickens short stories rather than the novels. A Christmas Carol was great, but something like Great Expectations is a struggle. I agree. I mean, War and Peace, it's all very well to say, oh, I'm cultured, I'm reading War and Peace. But honestly, it is quite hard to access today. I mean, I'm reading the thing and keeping up with the characters, and it's not easy to read. It's not necessarily that it's complicated, it's just that, um, you really need to get in touch with the characters. It's not, I don't know, I think it is harder to read older novels sometimes, but A Christmas Carol, you could read it in one night for sure. And also, the thing about A Christmas Carol, it's such a well known story. I mean, most of us have seen at least one adaptation. I've seen about 8 at least. It's kind of a tradition in my family, so it's such a familiar story. The only thing about A Christmas Carol, Paul, there's a bit that I've always been confused about. So Scrooge is visited by Jacob Marley, who says you will be haunted by 3 ghosts, and the time frame I get lost with because it's supposed to be Christmas Eve, and yet the ghosts visit on each night, which would make that like December the 21st or something. So I'm a little bit lost on the time frame of things with A Christmas Carol because the 3 ghosts don't come on the same night; they come on alternate nights. So must be a few days before Christmas Eve, yet it's implied it's Christmas Eve. I don't quite follow that. Unless we're meant to imagine that the ghost can control time or something. I can't imagine someone like Charles Dickens making a mistake on that. I think Dracula is one of those stories which makes a better audiobook for modern readers than a reading experience. Sometimes audiobooks can be better with one thing I read as a child was the Narnia series. That they're now 60, 70 years old. They're still relatively accessible, partly because they were children's books, but it's widely thought that the Narnia series had Christian allegories, particularly with Aslan, and so on. Let's see. Blackadder's Christmas Carol was my favorite. I don't think I've actually seen that one. I've seen the George C. Scott version. I've seen the Jim Carrey CGI version, which I actually quite liked, except I didn't understand the bit where he kind of shrunk. That didn't make much sense. The Albert Finney musical version, so. I saw one actually last Christmas Eve just for a change. It was a very little known stage production from 1977. I can't even remember who was in it, but it was actually quite well done, considering it's not a well known one. Everyone talks about the Muppets Christmas Carol. For me, no, you need humans in the. It's I don't know. Maybe I'd give it a chance, but okay, so we're going to cast Diana Ross as Solitaire initially. Interesting. I believe Jane Seymour was cast because they couldn't get Ross. Apparently Roger Moore asked her to take garlic before their sex scene because I guess to kind of I mean, any red-blooded male in his right mind would fall for Miss Seymour. So I guess that was the idea. Um, quite enjoyed Jane Seymour was also only 22 when she done that. Same age, incidentally, as Rosamund Pike when she done Miranda Frost and Die Another Day. Quite enjoyed the recent TV adaptation of Great Expectations. Rather good, I thought. I didn't get around to seeing that one. I saw one version from the 90s where it shows Pip and the other boy having a fight, and then I think she's called Estelle is looking through the window or something. I'm not that familiar with Great Expectations compared to A Christmas Carol or Oliver Twist. I know well, but again, in the novel, it's a pretty long novel. There's a lot of characters in that are not in any of the films.
like the famous musical from 1968 with Ron Moody and Shani Wallace and the guy who played Bill Sykes. What was his name? Kind of a macho actor. He was also in Gladiator. Forget his name now, but in that version, there's a lot of characters in the novel that aren't there. But I think the reasoning is they were too similar to Bill Sykes. There's a character called Monks that doesn't make it to the film in the original Dickens novel.